Dying on a sterile hospital mattress while your husband holds another woman's hand teaches you exactly what love is worth. Absolutely nothing. I gave my right kidney to save Caleb's childhood best friend, only to bleed out from sepsis while they picked out matching wedding bands. But when I closed my eyes for the last time, the darkness didn't take me. I woke up holding a cheap plastic pen, the living donor consent form, sitting right in front of me. This time, I'm keeping my organs to myself. Blood in the mouth tastes like rusty pennies. That was the last thing I remembered. The metallic tang settling on my tongue, the suffocating weight in my lungs, and the relentless high-pitched scream of the heart monitor flatlining. I remembered the phantom ache in my right flank, a hollow burning void where my kidney used to be. I remembered Caleb's back as he walked out of my room to check on Lily, letting the door click shut on my final breath. My eyes snapped open. There was no darkness, no afterlife, just the aggressive buzzing hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I gasped a sharp, ragged pull of air that felt like swallowing glass. My chest heaved perfectly intact. My hands flew to my side fingers, desperately digging into the fabric of my cotton blouse. No bandages, no stitches, just whole, unbroken flesh. Nora. Hey, Nora, breathe. It's okay to be nervous. The voice hit me like a physical blow. I flinched violently, knocking my knee against the underside of the faux wood desk. Caleb. He was sitting in the chair next to me, leaning in close. The smell of him spearmint gum masking stale coffee layered over his signature cedarwood cologne made my stomach churn. I stared at him. He looked younger, the stress lines around his eyes less pronounced than they had been on the day I died. His hand was resting on my thigh, his thumb drawing slow, supposedly comforting circles against my jeans. I looked down. My right hand was gripping a blue plastic ballpoint pen so tightly my knuckles were white. Beneath the tip of the pen lay a stack of stapled papers. St. Jude's Medical Center, living donor, consent, and release form. Recipient, Lily Harper. A wave of vertigo washed over me. The room tilted. The scratchy texture of the waiting room's tweed chairs against my back, the faint smell of rubbing alcohol and industrial floor wax, it was all too real. I wasn't dead. I was back. Back to a Tuesday afternoon 3 years ago. The exact moment I signed my life away. I know it's scary, Caleb murmured, his voice adopting that soft, patronizing cadence he always used when he was managing my emotions. But Dr. Evans said the complication rate is practically zero. You're doing a beautiful thing, Nora. You're saving her life. I'll never be able to thank you enough. He squeezed my thigh. In my first life, that squeeze had felt like an anchor. It had felt like love. I had signed the paper thinking I was cementing our marriage, proving to him that I was the ultimate partner, willing to sacrifice a piece of myself for his dear tragic friend. Now his touch felt like a roach crawling across my skin. I looked at his face. The earnest, pleading brown eyes, the slight pout of his lower lip. He was a masterclass in vulnerability, playing the desperate friend, terrified of losing his platonic soulmate. I knew better now. I knew about the burner phone in his glove compartment. I knew about the hotel receipts disguised as business lunches. I knew that while I was shivering in recovery, vomiting from the anesthesia, he was in her private suite, kissing her forehead and whispering that the worst was over, that they could finally be happy. My hand shook, not with fear, but with a sudden molten surge of rage. Nora, Caleb's brow furrowed the mask of the supportive husband, slipping just a fraction to reveal a sliver of impatience. Come on, babe. The coordinator is waiting for the paperwork. Lily is getting prepped down the hall. I looked at the pen in my hand. It had a chewed cap. Someone else's anxiety left behind for me. Slowly, deliberately, I loosened my grip. The pen slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the desk. The sound was small, but in the quiet of the consultation room, it sounded like a gunshot. "No," I said. My voice was a raspy whisper, my throat still dry from the ghost of my death rattle. Caleb blinked. He let out a short, nervous laugh. "No, what do you need a glass of water first? I can ask the nurse." "I'm not signing it." I pushed the chair back. Its metal legs screeched against the linoleum floor. I stood up, my legs trembling so badly I had to lock my knees to stay upright. The adrenaline was hitting my system in massive, uncoordinated waves. I felt nauseous. I felt powerful. I felt completely unhinged. Caleb stood up too, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Whoa, whoa! Nora, talk to me. Are you having a panic attack?" "It's just a routine procedure. We've been over this 100 times. I am not giving her my kidney, Caleb." I looked him dead in the eye. I wanted to see the exact moment the realization hit him. His face hardened. The gentle husband vanished, replaced by the cornered animal I had only briefly glimpsed in my past life when I had begged him to stay by my hospital bed instead of going to Lily. "Nora, this isn't funny." He snapped, his voice dropping an octave. "Lily's kidneys are failing. She's on dialysis. She doesn't have time for you to get cold feet. You are a match. You promised." I changed my mind. "You can't just change your mind." He took a step toward me, crowding my space. His chest puffed out. Intimidation tactics. "She's dying, Nora. Do you have any idea what you're saying right now? You're condemning her to death. And you condemn me to mine." I thought, a bitter, hysterical laugh bubbling up in my chest. I swallowed it down. I couldn't tell him the truth. He would think I was insane. He would have me committed, and then he and Lily would find some other way to ruin me. "My body, my choice," I said, my voice shockingly steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I'm not doing it. Find another donor. Buy one on the black market for all I care." I turned on my heel and grabbed my purse from the coat rack. The leather strap felt heavy grounding. "Nora!" Caleb grabbed my upper arm. His grip was bruising, painful. "You are not walking out of here. If you walk out that door, you are basically killing her. I will never forgive you for this." I looked down at his fingers digging into my bicep, then up to his furious, panicked eyes. "Let go of me," I said, dropping my voice to a dead flat calm. "Or I will start screaming right now, and I will tell every nurse in this ward that you are physically coercing me into an organ donation." Caleb froze. He looked around the empty consultation room, paranoid that someone was watching through the blinds. Slowly, his fingers uncurled. He stepped back, looking at me as if I were a stranger. "You're a monster," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of disgust and genuine shock. "Maybe," I replied, pulling my coat over my shoulders. "But I'm a monster with 2 functioning kidneys. Tell Lily I wish her the best." I walked out of the room, leaving the unsigned papers on the desk. Rain had begun to fall by the time I pushed through the hospital's revolving doors, the damp gray afternoon perfectly matching the exhaustion seeping into my bones. The cold air hit my face, stinging my cheeks. I breathed in deeply, savoring the smell of wet asphalt and car exhaust. It smelled like being alive. I didn't wait for Caleb. I walked straight to my car, the sensible paid-off sedan I had bought before we got married, and unlocked it. As I slid into the driver's seat, the leather cold against my thighs, my hands finally gave out. They shook violently against the steering wheel. I rested my forehead against the damp horn, squeezing my eyes shut. I'm alive. I'm alive. I'm alive. The passenger door wrenched open, letting in a gust of wind and rain. Caleb threw himself into the seat, slamming the door shut with enough force to shake the entire car. He didn't look at me. He sat stiffly staring out the windshield, his jaw ticking furiously. Water dripped from the ends of his hair onto the collar of his expensive wool coat. I didn't say a word. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine purred to life, the heater kicking in with a low hum. I pulled out of the parking lot, merging into the sluggish city traffic. The silence inside the car was suffocating, thick with unspoken accusations. In my previous life, I would have been desperate to fill it. I would have reached across the center console, touched his hand, apologized for my hesitation, promised to make it right. My entire existence had revolved around managing Caleb's moods, smoothing over the rough edges of his temper, being the easy wife. Now I just watched the windshield wipers drag back and forth. Squeak swish, squeak swish. I don't even know who you are right now, Caleb finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead. To do this to someone, to look a dying woman in the face and snatch the cure away at the last second. It's sick, Nora. It's actually sadistic. I didn't look her in the face, I corrected quietly, keeping my eyes on the taillights of the truck in front of us. I looked you in the face. What the hell is that supposed to mean? It means my medical decisions are mine. He laughed, a harsh barking sound without a shred of humor. Your medical decisions. Right. This isn't about you, Nora. God, for once in your life, could you not make everything about your own comfort? Lily is terrified. She was crying when I had to go in there and tell her the transplant was off. She thought she was getting her life back today. She thought she was getting my life today, I thought. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The urge to scream the truth at him was a physical pressure in my chest. I wanted to tell him that I knew what he was doing with Lily in hotel rooms on Tuesday afternoons. I wanted to tell him how it felt when my internal stitches tore, how the infection smelled, how the fever baked my brain while he ignored my calls. But exposing the betrayal now wouldn't give me leverage. It would just give him a chance to lie, to gaslight me, to pivot and make me the crazy jealous wife holding a kidney hostage out of spite. I needed to be smart. I needed to dismantle his life exactly the way he had dismantled mine. We pulled into the driveway of our townhouse. The house we had bought together, the one I had spent months decorating. The soft beige siding, the neatly trimmed hedges, the dark blue front door. It looked like a magazine cover. It looked like a tomb. I parked, turned off the engine, and stepped out into the rain. Caleb followed close behind, his heavy footsteps splashing in the puddles on the walkway. As soon as we crossed the threshold, the illusion of our perfect home shattered. The quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a countdown. I took off my wet coat and hung it up. Caleb threw his keys onto the console table. The metal hit the wood with a sharp clack. "We are going back tomorrow," Caleb said, his voice dropping the angry edge, shifting back to the authoritative tone he used when he expected obedience. "I'll call the clinic. I'll tell them you had an anxiety attack. They can reschedule the prep for the end of the week." I walked past him into the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed steadily. I opened the cabinet, took out a glass, and filled it with tap water. I took my time. The water was icy cold, going down my throat. I focused on the sensation, reminding myself that I had a throat, a stomach, a body that belonged to me. "Did you hear me, Nora?" Caleb was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his arms crossed. I set the glass down on the granite counter. "I'm not going back, Caleb. Not tomorrow. Not ever." He stepped into the kitchen, his face flushed. "You are my wife. You committed to this. You don't get to just back out and ruin 3 lives because you're scared of a little surgery." 3 lives. I tilted my head, looking at him with genuine curiosity. "Yours, hers, and whose?" He hesitated, blinking. "Mine, hers, and yours. You'll have to live with the guilt. You'll have to live knowing you let my best friend die." "I think I'll manage," I said, walking past him. He grabbed my wrist as I passed. This time I didn't freeze. I yanked my arm back violently, my nails catching his skin. "Don't touch me," I snarled, the feral hatred in my voice, surprising even me. Caleb stumbled back a half step, staring at the thin red scratch on the back of his hand. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "You're sleeping in the guest room tonight," I told him, my voice turning to ice. "If you try to come into the master bedroom, I will call the police and tell them you assaulted me. And if you keep pushing this kidney issue, I will file for divorce tomorrow." "Divorce?" He barked a laugh, though it sounded shaky. "Over a panic attack? You're insane. Pack a bag if you prefer," I said, turning my back on him and walking toward the stairs. "Go sleep at Lily's. I'm sure she has room in her hospital bed." I didn't look back to see his reaction. I walked up the stairs, went into our bedroom, and locked the door behind me. I slid down the solid wood frame sitting on the plush carpet, and finally, for the first time since waking up, I let myself cry. Not out of sadness, out of pure toxic relief. The house was dead quiet when I woke up the next morning. I lay in the king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling fan. The sheets on Caleb's side were cold, undisturbed. I hadn't expected him to stay. He was entirely predictable. When faced with resistance from me, he always ran to Lily for validation. She would stroke his ego, tell him how difficult I was, how brave he was for putting up with me. I took a long, hot shower. I let the water scald my back, washing away the lingering hospital smell from the day before. I dressed carefully, a sharp-tailored blazer, dark jeans, expensive boots, armor. In my past life, I had spent the weeks leading up to the surgery wearing oversized sweatpants, making myself small, apologizing for my anxiety. Today I took up space. When I went downstairs, I found a note violently scrawled on the kitchen island. "I'm at the hospital. Lily took a turn for the worse last night after she heard the news. Her blood pressure spiked. If you have a shred of humanity left, you'll come down here and fix this." C.I. stared at the note. A dark, cynical amusement settled in my chest. A turn for the worse. Of course she did. Lily was a master manipulator, a woman who weaponized her fragility like a scalpel. She knew exactly how to make Caleb feel like a savior, and she knew how to make me look like the villain. I crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash. I wasn't going to go. My initial plan was to call a lawyer, start moving money into a separate account, and begin the clinical process of excising Caleb from my life. But as I drank my coffee, a restless, venomous itch started beneath my skin. If I just walked away, they would spin the narrative. Caleb would tell all our mutual friends that I was a coward who left him during the darkest period of his life. Lily would play the dying martyr. They would win the social war. More than that, I wanted to look Lily in the eye. I wanted to see the woman who had stolen my life, my husband and my organ, now that the power dynamic had shifted. I left my coffee mug in the sink, grabbed my keys, and headed back to St. Jude's. Lily was in the VIP wing on the 4th floor. Caleb had paid out of pocket to upgrade her room, claiming she needed a calm environment to prepare for the transplant. I walked past the nurse's station, my heels clicking sharply against the polished linoleum. No one stopped me. I was still listed as family, the designated savior. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to room 412 without knocking. The room smelled overpowering. Someone had filled it with massive floral arrangements, lilies, ironically, their sweet rotting scent clashing violently with the sharp tang of iodine and hospital bleach. Lily was propped up against a mountain of pillows. She looked pale, her dark hair artfully tousled around her shoulders. An IV line ran into the back of her delicate hand. Caleb was sitting on the edge of the mattress, leaning over her, speaking in a low, hushed whisper. His hand was resting on her thigh, exactly where it had rested on mine the day before. They both jumped when the door clicked shut behind me. Caleb stood up so fast he nearly knocked over her IV stand. Nora... Caleb's face went through a rapid cycle of emotions, shock, guilt, and then settling into a familiar, self-righteous relief. You came. Lily adjusted her posture, pulling her pale pink cardigan tighter around her shoulders. She looked at me with massive tear-filled eyes. The performance began immediately. Nora, Lily breathed, her voice a fragile, trembling whisper. Caleb told me, he told me you were scared. It's okay. I understand. I really do. She didn't look understanding. She looked calculating. Beneath the wet eyelashes and the trembling lower lip, I saw the hard, predatory glint in her eyes. She was waiting for me to apologize. She was waiting for Caleb to pressure me until I broke. I'm not scared, Lily, I said, walking slowly toward the foot of the bed. I didn't cross my arms. I kept my posture relaxed, open, indifferent. Then, what is it? Caleb demanded, stepping toward me. If you're not scared, then why are you doing this? Look at her, Nora. Look at what you're doing to her. I looked at her. I looked at the expensive silk nightgown she was wearing, a gift from Caleb, undoubtedly. I looked at the gold Cartier love bracelet on her wrist. The exact same bracelet Caleb had bought for me for our anniversary, claiming it was custom-made and unique. I'm not doing anything to her, I said smoothly. Her kidneys are failing. That's biology. It has nothing to do with me. Lily let out a soft, choked sob, burying her face in her hands. Caleb rushed back to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders and glaring at me with pure venom. Get out, Caleb hissed. If you just came here to gloat, get the hell out. I came here because you left a dramatic note on my kitchen counter. I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through my veins. And because I wanted to make sure Lily heard it directly from me, so there are no misunderstandings. I stepped closer to the bed, leaning slightly over the railing. Lily peered up at me through her fingers. I am not giving you my kidney, I said, enunciating every syllable. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. You two are going to have to find another way to keep yourselves entertained. Lily's hands dropped from her face. The crying stopped instantly. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped entirely, and I saw pure, unadulterated hatred in her eyes. It was a beautiful sight. Nora, please, Lily said, her voice dropping the breathy fragility. It sounded tighter, harder. We're family. Caleb and we've been friends since childhood. You know how much this means to him. I know exactly what you mean to him, I said. I let my eyes drift deliberately from her face down to the Cartier bracelet and then up to Caleb's panicked eyes. I saw Caleb stop breathing. He knew that I knew. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The color completely drained from his face. Nora, Caleb started, his voice suddenly weak, the bluster gone. Good luck with the dialysis, Lily. I smiled, a cold, empty baring of teeth. I hear it's a bitch. I turned around and walked out of the room. As the heavy wooden door swung shut behind me, I didn't hear a single sound from inside. No sobbing, no righteous anger. Just the dead, terrified silence of two people who had just realized their perfect little game was over. Sunlight slanted through the heavy oak blinds of Arthur Penhaligon's law office, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale, air-conditioned air. The room smelled of old paper leather polish and the faint sour tang of coffee left on a heating pad too long. It was the smell of marriages dissolving. I sat in a wingback chair that was slightly too large for me, my fingers tracing the raised grain of the mahogany desk. Arthur, a man in his late 50s with tired eyes and a perfectly tailored gray suit, was reviewing the folder I had handed him. The only sound in the room was the heavy rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner and the abrasive snick of his thumb turning the pages. You understand, Arthur began, his voice gravelly, that in this state fault doesn't necessarily dictate the division of assets. However, dissipation of marital funds money spent on an extramarital affair is a different animal. I don't just want the money, Arthur, I said. My voice sounded foreign to me, flat, deadened. I want the timeline documented, every hotel room, every jewelry purchase, every expensive dinner. In my previous life, I had died not knowing the financial depth of his betrayal. Caleb controlled the main accounts. I managed the groceries, the utilities, the small things. I was the creative one. He was the numbers guy. This morning before coming here, I had walked into our bank branch and pulled 5 years of statements. The ink on the printouts had still been warm in my hands when I spotted the first recurring charge. The Grand Hotel, $350. Every Tuesday. The day Caleb supposedly had his weekly partner meetings at the firm. The day Lily always had her exhausting dialysis treatments and couldn't be disturbed. I can subpoena the credit card records, Arthur said, making a note with a silver fountain pen. The nib scratched harshly against the legal pad. But you need to be prepared, Nora. This process is invasive. He will likely retaliate. If he's as manipulative as you say, he won't let you dictate the narrative. He already thinks I'm a monster, I replied, a dark, bitter humor curling the corner of my mouth. He thinks I'm backing out of the kidney donation purely out of spite. Arthur looked up, his thick eyebrows drawing together. Are you out of spite? I'm backing out because I need my kidney to live, I said, a sudden fierce heat rising in my chest. And because I refuse to be harvested to keep my husband's mistress alive. The brutal honesty hung in the air. Arthur didn't flinch. He just nodded, slowly tapping his pen against the desk. Good, stay angry. The ones who cry usually settle for less than they deserve. Now, let's talk about the house. Leaving the office an hour later, the midday heat hit me like a physical blow. The asphalt of the parking lot radiated waves of distortion. My phone buzzed in my purse. A heavy, relentless vibration. I pulled it out. 32 missed calls, 40 texts, all from Caleb. Nora, please pick up. We need to talk. You can't just ignore me. Lily is having a panic attack. Where are you? This isn't you. You are a kind person. Don't let your anxiety turn you into someone cruel. Answer your fucking phone, Nora. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the power button. My chest tightened, a Pavlovian response to his anger. For 5 years, my nervous system had been tuned to the frequency of his moods. A sharp word from him used to send me spiraling into apologies. Even now, with the memory of dying alone burned into my brain, my hands shook slightly. The conditioning ran deep. I forced myself to read the text again, not as his wife, but as a spectator. The manipulation was so blatant, it was almost insulting. He was ping-ponging between pleading, guilt-tripping, and raging. I didn't reply. I powered the phone down, tossing it onto the passenger seat. I needed a clear head for what came next. The legal battle was only half the war. The social slaughter was about to begin. The smell of garlic and roasting chicken filled the house when I unlocked the front door that evening. It was a domestic, comforting scent that felt violently out of place. I paused in the foyer, the heavy silence of the house broken by the clinking of silverware in the kitchen. I slipped off my heels, my stockinged feet silent on the hardwood floor. Caleb was standing by the stove, stirring a pot. Sitting at the kitchen island nursing a glass of white wine was Sarah. Sarah was my supposed best friend. She was also the woman who in my past life had stood at my funeral and tearfully told everyone how brave Caleb was for finding comfort in Lily's arms so quickly. Sarah looked up as I entered. Her face immediately fell into a mask of deep, practiced pity. She wore a beige cashmere sweater that looked soft enough to melt, but her eyes were hard and calculating. Nora, Sarah breathed, setting her wine glass down. Honey, we've been so worried. Caleb turned from the stove. He looked exhausted. His hair rumpled the sleeves of his dress shirt, rolled up to the elbows. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, projecting the image of a weary, long-suffering husband trying to hold his family together. I asked Sarah to come over, Caleb said, his voice low and soothing. I thought you might need someone else to talk to. Someone who isn't me. I know you're overwhelmed. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. The anger inside me wasn't a hot, fiery thing anymore. It was cold. It was glacial. Overwhelmed, I repeated, letting the word roll around in my mouth. It tasted like ash. Sarah stood up, walking toward me, with her arms outstretched for a hug. I held up a single hand palm out. Stop. She froze, blinking in surprise. A flash of irritation crossed her face before she forced the sympathetic pout back into place. Nora, please, talk to us. Caleb told me everything. He told me you panicked at the hospital. It's totally normal to be scared of surgery. Nobody is judging you. Nobody is judging me, I echoed. So, you didn't spend the last 2 hours drinking my Pinot Grigio and talking about how selfish I'm being. Sarah flushed a creeping red stain spreading up her neck. That's not fair. We are trying to understand. Lily is on dialysis, Nora. She's deteriorating. You are her only match. If you don't do this, she's going to die. How are you going to live with yourself? I looked from Sarah to Caleb. Caleb was leaning against the counter, watching me intently. He was letting Sarah do the dirty work, playing the concerned friend, to bypass my defenses. I'll live with myself quite comfortably with 2 functioning kidneys, I said, my voice steady. What I want to know, Sarah, is why you care so much. Is it because you love Lily? Or is it because you like feeling morally superior? Excuse me, Sarah gasped, clutching her invisible pearls. You heard me, I said, pushing off the doorframe and walking into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water from the fridge, ignoring the wine. The ice clinked sharply against the glass. You come into my house, drink my wine, and tell me to lay down on an operating table and let them cut out an organ for a woman who... I stopped myself. I couldn't blow the affair yet. I needed the burner phone. I needed the undeniable proof. A woman who... What? Caleb demanded, stepping forward, his eyes narrowing. A woman who isn't my responsibility, I finished smoothly. I took a sip of the ice water. The cold shocked my system, keeping me grounded. I am not an organ farm, Caleb. I am not a spare parts facility for your friends. She's not just a friend. Caleb slammed his hand down on the granite counter. The crack echoed in the kitchen. Sarah flinched violently. I know, I said. The two words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Caleb froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked translucent. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. What does that mean? Sarah asked, looking frantically between the two of us. It means, I said, setting my glass down, that the conversation is over. Sarah, it's time for you to leave. Caleb, your bags are still packed from yesterday, right? I suggest you take them. You can come back for the rest of your things when my lawyer contacts you. Nora, wait! Caleb stuttered, suddenly terrified, the anger completely evaporating. Get out of my house, I said. It wasn't a yell. It was a command spoken from the very bottom of my lungs. Sarah grabbed her purse, her eyes wide with shock, and scrambled toward the front door. Caleb stood paralyzed for a moment longer, staring at me as if trying to decipher a stranger's face. He saw no mercy. He grabbed his keys and followed Sarah out. When the door slammed shut, the silence rushed back in. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until my fingers ached, my chest heaving. A drop of sweat traced down my spine. The adrenaline crash was brutal, leaving me hollow and shaking. But as I listened to his car engine start and fade down the street, a genuine, unhinged smile stretched across my face. Caleb hadn't taken everything. He had grabbed his overnight duffel, but the bulk of his life was still here. His golf clubs in the garage, his winter coats in the hall closet, his locked firebox in the bottom drawer of his home office desk. I started in the garage. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline-damp cardboard and the metallic tang of old tools. The single overhead bulb cast harsh, long shadows. In my previous life, I had never snooped. I believed trust was the foundation of marriage. I had been a fool wrapping myself in blind faith while he dismantled me piece by piece. I dragged his heavy leather golf bag out from behind the snowblower. He golfed every other Sunday with the partners. I unzipped the side pockets one by one. Tees, spare balls, a crumpled scorecard, a half-empty bottle of sunscreen. Nothing. I moved to his car, which he had left parked in the driveway. He had taken my sedan in his panic, leaving his SUV behind. I clicked the unlock button on my spare fob. The heavy door groaned open. The smell of cedarwood cologne and leather hit my nose, immediately making my stomach roll. I dug through the glove compartment. Registration insurance napkins, a tire gauge. I ran my hands under the seats, scraping my knuckles on the metal tracks. Dust and stray fries. I sat back in the driver's seat, wiping a streak of grease from my forehead. Where would a man who controls everything hide his most dangerous secret? I looked at the center console. In his SUV, the cup holders had a rubber lining that could be removed for cleaning. I wedged my fingernail under the edge of the thick rubber mat and pulled. It popped out with a wet suction sound. Beneath it, lying flat in the shallow plastic recess, was a cheap black prepaid smartphone. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at it for a long, heavy moment. It was a physical manifestation of my murder, a rectangular piece of plastic and glass that held the coordinates of my ruin. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. It felt greasy. I pressed the power button. The screen illuminated, casting a harsh, bluish glare in the dark garage. Enter passcode. I didn't even have to think. I typed in 0812. August 12th, Lily's birthday. The screen unlocked. I tapped on the messages icon. There was only one thread. A contact saved simply as L. I started scrolling. The messages loaded a cascading waterfall of betrayal. Tuesday, 2:15 p.m. She's so annoying today, complaining about the hospital smell. I can't wait until this is over. L. Just keep her calm. Once I have the kidney, we won't need to coddle her anymore. Wednesday, 10 p.m. I'm lying next to her, but I'm thinking about you. L. Soon, baby. Did she sign the advance directives? Make sure you have medical power of attorney. C. I got it. Whatever happens during surgery, I'm making the calls. A wave of intense, violent nausea hit me. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat, threw the car door open, and vomited onto the concrete driveway. Acid burned the back of my throat. I coughed, spitting bile onto the pavement, tears streaming down my face. The physical reality of it was so much worse than the suspicion. They hadn't just been having an affair. They had been plotting a medical execution. He wanted medical power of attorney not to protect me, but to ensure that if anything went wrong during the extraction, he could pull the plug. He wanted to inherit the house, the life insurance, and the healthy kidney, all wrapped up in a tragic widower's bow. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, my chest heaving. The cool night air kissed my sweat-dampened forehead. I sat back down in the car. The phone was still glowing on the leather seat. I picked it up, my hands no longer shaking. The nausea had passed, replaced by a cold surgical clarity. I pulled my own phone from my pocket and opened the camera. I took pictures of every single message, every hotel confirmation, every vile, calculating word they had exchanged. The flash illuminated the dark interior of the car, lightning strikes of evidence. When I reached the end of the thread, I powered the burner phone down and slipped it into my pocket. Caleb and Lily thought they were playing a desperate dying woman and an anxious wife. They didn't know I had already died once. They didn't know that the woman who woke up in that hospital waiting room was a ghost with nothing left to lose. I locked the car and walked back into the house. It was time to burn it all to the ground. Morning arrived with the harsh, flat light of a heavy, overcast sky, bleeding through the kitchen blinds and painting the granite countertops in dull gray strips. I hadn't slept. I had spent the entire night curled in the armchair of the home office, bathed in the sickly blue glow of my laptop screen, transferring the photos from the burner phone to a secure cloud drive, a flash drive, and an offline hard drive. Paranoia was my new best friend. The physical burner phone was currently sealed inside a Ziploc bag, buried at the bottom of a box of old winter sweaters in the attic. Out of sight, but emitting a radioactive pull I could feel in my teeth. By 8 o'clock, the silence of the empty house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a vacuum. I brewed coffee, the sharp roasted smell failing to mask the lingering metallic scent of my own vomit from the driveway hours earlier. I poured the black liquid into a ceramic mug, wrapping my cold fingers around the heat, and watched the street through the window over the sink. Caleb's SUV was still parked in the driveway. He had the keys to my sedan. He would have to come back. At 9:30, a black Uber pulled up to the curb. The heavy thud of the car door shutting echoed down the quiet suburban street. Caleb walked up the driveway. He looked ruined. His suit jacket was deeply wrinkled, his tie was missing, and dark bruised bags hung under his eyes. He moved with a frantic, uncoordinated energy, his eyes darting toward the garage, then to his SUV, then to the front door. He keyed the lock. The deadbolt clicked. I didn't move from the kitchen island. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting flat on the cool stone counter, a thick manila folder resting under my right palm. Caleb burst into the foyer, breathing heavily, smelling of stale sweat and cheap hospital coffee. He stopped dead when he saw me. For a split second, the old reflex flared in my chest, the urge to walk over, smooth his lapels, and ask him what was wrong. I killed the impulse, instantly stomping it down until it stopped twitching. "Nora!" He breathed, his voice cracking. He didn't come closer. "I need my car. I have to go to work. I need my keys." "They're on the console," I said, my voice deliberately flat. He snatched the spare fob from the entryway table, his hands shaking so violently the keys rattled against the wood. He didn't leave. He stood there, shifting his weight, his eyes darting toward the hallway that led to the garage. He was trying to figure out how to get to the car's interior without me noticing. "Is there something else?" I asked, taking a slow sip of my coffee. The bitterness coated my tongue. "No," he lied, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. "No, Lily had a rough night. Her creatinine levels are spiking. The doctors are talking about emergency dialysis access." He was testing the waters, throwing out the bait to see if my conscience had regenerated overnight. "That sounds expensive," I remarked indifferently. His jaw clenched. The mask of the devastated friend slipped, revealing the terrified, cornered animal underneath. "Where is it, Nora?" "Where is what?" "You know what?" He took a step into the kitchen, his voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper. "Did you go through my car?" "I don't know what you're talking about, Caleb." I kept my face utterly blank. "If you're looking for your golf clubs, they're in the garage." "Don't play games with me," he shouted, the sudden volume making the coffee in my mug tremble. He lunged forward, closing the distance between us, his hands slamming down on the island opposite me. His breath hit my face, sour, panicked. "Give me the phone, Nora. I know you found it." "If you know I found it," I said, leaning in just a fraction, matching his intensity with dead hollow ice, "then you know exactly what's on it. And you know why you are never stepping foot in this house again." All the air rushed out of him. His arms gave way, and he stumbled back, catching himself on a bar stool. His face turned a sick, mottled gray. "Nora, please," he stammered, the aggression vanishing, replaced by a pathetic, whining desperation. "You don't understand. It's out of context. We were stressed. I was terrified of losing her, and I vented. I said things I didn't mean. It was just a stupid fantasy. A fantasy." I repeated, sliding the manila folder across the smooth granite. It stopped right at the edge, dangling over the floor. "Like having medical power of attorney so you could sign a DNR if I hemorrhaged on the table," Was that a fun little bedtime story for you two? Caleb stared at the folder as if it were a bomb. He reached out with a trembling hand and flipped it open. I had printed the worst of it. The texts where they mocked my anxiety. The texts where they calculated the equity in this very house. The hotel receipts dating back 2 years. He read the first page. A wet choking sound escaped his throat. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, swimming with tears. I didn't mean it. I swear to God, Nora, I never would have let them hurt you. I just told her what she wanted to hear, to keep her calm. You are a coward, Caleb, I said, feeling a strange, hollow victory. You can't even stand by your own sociopathy. You're trying to throw your dying mistress under the bus to save yourself. She manipulated me, he cried, tears finally spilling over his lashes, tracking through the grease on his cheeks. She's sick. She played on my sympathy. Save it for the judge, I tapped the folder. Arthur Penhaligon is filing the divorce papers at noon today. He is also filing an emergency injunction to freeze our joint accounts due to your gross dissipation of marital assets. Those hotel rooms add up. You can't freeze the accounts, panic stripped his voice raw. Lily needs that money for the private clinic. Her insurance won't cover the out-of-network dialysis. Biology is a bitch, isn't it? I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It felt like my face was cracking. Get out. Nora, please, I have nothing. If you freeze the account, she dies. I go bankrupt. Please, I'll do anything. I'll leave her. I'll go to therapy. Just don't do this. He fell to his knees, literally dropped to the hardwood floor, grabbing the hem of my jeans. The fabric pulled tight against my leg. I looked down at him. This was the man I had promised my life to. This was the man I had died for. Looking at him now blubbering on my kitchen floor, I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no residual love, just an overwhelming, exhausting disgust. Don't touch me, I said softly. He didn't let go. He pressed his face against my knee, sobbing. I reached blindly behind me, my fingers wrapping around the heavy ceramic base of the coffee mug. I didn't want to hit him. I just wanted him away from my body. I said, don't touch me. I poured the remaining hot coffee directly onto his hands. Caleb shrieked violently, jerking back his hands, waving in the air. The brown liquid splashed across the floorboards. He looked up at me, pure, unadulterated terror in his eyes. He finally realized that the woman he married was gone. He scrambled backward like a crab scrambling to his feet, slipping in the spilled coffee. He grabbed his keys from the console and bolted out the front door, leaving it hanging wide open. I stood in the quiet kitchen, listening to the roar of his SUV engine as he tore out of the driveway. I looked down at the puddle of coffee and the crumpled manila folder on the floor. I grabbed a roll of paper towels and started wiping it up. My hands were perfectly steady. 3 days later, the trap snapped shut. Caleb had spent 72 hours blowing up my phone from new numbers, leaving breathless, weeping voicemails alternating between apologies and threats. He tried to drain the joint checking account, only to find Arthur had beaten him by hours. The funds were locked in escrow. I knew Caleb wouldn't go down quietly. He was a narcissist, losing his audience. He needed to control the narrative. His mother, Beatrice, called me on Thursday evening. Her voice was dripping with condescension, demanding I attend a family mediation at her house. She told me I was being hysterical, that marriage was about forgiveness, and that leaving Caleb in his time of need was a sin I would answer for. I agreed to go. Beatrice lived in an overly decorated Victorian house across town, suffocated by floral wallpaper and the smell of potpourri. When I arrived, the parlor was staged like a tribunal. Beatrice sat in a high-backed armchair, her lips pursed. Sarah was there perched on the edge of the sofa, playing the neutral peacemaker. Caleb stood by the fireplace, looking thoroughly beaten, but radiating a desperate nervous energy. He thought he had the high ground here. He thought his mother's authority would break me. "Sit down, Nora," Beatrice commanded, gesturing to a hard wooden chair opposite the sofa. "We need to put an end to this childishness." I didn't sit. I remained standing in the doorway, the strap of my heavy leather tote bag biting into my shoulder. "I won't be staying long, Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice level. The air in the room felt thick, stifling. "I only came because I knew Caleb wouldn't tell you the truth, and I refused to be the villain in his fictional tragedy. The truth is, you're abandoning your husband because he has a sick friend, and you are entirely too self-centered to handle sharing his attention." Beatrice snapped her rings, clinking against the armrest. "And now you are maliciously locking him out of his own money. It's financial abuse, Nora." I looked at Caleb. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared a hole into the Persian rug, his jaw working silently. He had fed them the exact lie I expected. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out 3 identical bound folders. I had gone to a print shop. I had made them professional. I tossed the first one onto Beatrice's lap. The heavy thud made her flinch. I tossed the second onto the cushion next to Sarah. I kept the third in my hand. "What is this?" Beatrice asked, touching the cover with 2 fingers as if it were diseased. "That is a heavily redacted chronological timeline of your son's 2-year affair with Lily Harper," I said clearly, letting the words bounce off the floral walls. "Including hotel receipts, jewelry purchases made with marital funds, and a very illuminating text thread where they discuss my potential death during the kidney extraction as a convenient solution to their financial problems." The room went entirely, completely dead. The ticking of the mantel clock sounded like a sledgehammer. Sarah let out a small, strangled gasp. She scrambled back on the sofa, distancing herself from the folder as if it might bite her. Beatrice's face went slack. She looked from me to Caleb. Caleb had shrunk against the mantelpiece, his eyes squeezed shut, his hands covering his face. "Caleb," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. "What is she talking about?" He didn't answer. A pathetic, ragged sob tore out of his chest. Slowly, with trembling hands, Beatrice opened the folder. I watched her eyes track across the first page of printed text messages. I watched the color completely drain from her face, leaving her looking like a wax sculpture. I watched her mouth open and close, trying to find oxygen in the suffocating room. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, leaning over to read a page from her own copy. She looked up at Caleb, her expression morphing from pity to absolute revulsion. "You told her to forge the advance directives. Caleb, are you insane?" "I was stressed," Caleb screamed, finally snapping, dropping his hands from his face. His eyes were bloodshot spit flying from his lips. "You don't know what it's like. Lily was dying. I had to give her hope. I wasn't actually going to let Nora die. It was just talk. It doesn't matter what it was." I interrupted, my voice cutting through his hysteria like a scalpel. "What matters is that it's documented, and it's going to the judge. And if you ever try to contact me again, Caleb, or if you ever send your mother or your friends to harass me, I will make sure this folder goes to the partners at your law firm. Caleb choked on a breath. His firm had a strict morality clause. A public divorce involving premeditated medical coercion and financial fraud would result in immediate termination and likely disbarment. "You're destroying my life," he whispered, sliding down the bricks of the fireplace until he hit the floor, pulling his knees to his chest. "No," I corrected, adjusting the strap of my bag. "I'm just surviving it." I looked at Beatrice. She was crying now, silent tears ruining her expensive makeup, staring at the pages in her lap as if she were reading an obituary for the son she thought she knew. I turned and walked out of the parlor, down the hallway, and out the front door. The cool night air hit my face, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. My legs were shaking, a fine tremor that started in my knees and worked its way up to my ribs. The adrenaline was leaving my system, leaving behind a profound aching exhaustion. I got into my car, locked the doors, and leaned my head back against the headrest. I closed my eyes. The phantom pain in my right side, the burning hollow ache of the missing kidney that had haunted my first death, was completely gone. I pressed my hand hard against my flank. Solid muscle, intact flesh. I was whole. The divorce took 6 months. 6 brutal, exhausting months of depositions, asset tracking, and legal posturing. But Caleb had no teeth left. The burner phone was the silver bullet Arthur used to completely eviscerate his claims to the house, my savings, and my retirement accounts. Caleb was forced to assume all the debt he had accrued financing Lily's lifestyle. I didn't see Caleb often. When I did, sitting across from him in sterile conference rooms, the physical deterioration was shocking. The tailored suits hung off him like a scarecrow. His hair was thinning his skin, gray and pallid. The stress of impending bankruptcy, combined with the crushing weight of his exposed sociopathy, was eating him alive from the inside out. Lily predictably had taken a sharp downturn. Without Caleb's money to fund the private out-of-network clinic, she was forced into the public health system. She was placed on the bottom of the transplant list, doing grueling dialysis sessions 3 times a week in a crowded linoleum-floored room alongside a dozen other strangers. The climax of their tragedy happened on a Tuesday. The irony was not lost on me. I had gone to the hospital to finalize the release of my medical records to my new primary care physician. I wanted absolutely no ties left to St. Jude's. I was walking down the ground floor corridor, buttoning my coat against the December chill, when I heard the voice. A raw, animalistic sound of pure despair. I stopped. I turned my head toward the glass-walled waiting area outside the nephrology ward. Caleb was sitting on a cheap plastic chair. He was hunched over, his elbows resting on his knees, his face buried in his hands. He was sobbing. It wasn't the manipulative, performative crying he had used on me in the kitchen. This was a soul-deep, jagged weeping that shook his entire emaciated frame. Standing next to him holding a clipboard was Dr. Evans, the same doctor who had tried to convince me that the complication rate was practically 0. Dr. Evans looked grim, a hand resting awkwardly on Caleb's shaking shoulder. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what had happened. Lily's body was rejecting the dialysis. Her veins were collapsing. She was running out of time, and Caleb was running out of money to buy her more. I stood in the hallway, hidden in the flow of foot traffic, and watched him. In my past life, watching Caleb cry had physically hurt me. I would have felt the tearing sensation in my chest, the immediate overwhelming urge to sacrifice pieces of myself, to build a bridge over his pain. I would have cut out my own heart and handed it to him if it meant he would stop weeping. Now I just watched. I noticed the way the fluorescent light caught the bald spot forming on the crown of his head. I noticed the scuff marks on his cheap leather shoes. I noticed the frayed cuff of his shirt. He lifted his head, wiping his face with the back of a trembling coffee-burned hand. His eyes were red, swollen, entirely devoid of hope. He looked through the glass directly into the corridor. For a second, his eyes locked onto mine. Time slowed down. The hospital noise, the beeping monitors, the squeaking cartwheels, the murmur of voices faded into a dull hum. He stared at me. I saw the recognition hit him. I saw him look at my face healthy and flushed with color. I saw him look at my posture, straight and unburdened. He looked at the space in my torso, where my right kidney sat quietly, doing its job filtering the toxins from my blood. The realization of what he had thrown away crashed over him in a visible wave. He had traded a loyal wife and a guaranteed salvation for a secret lover, an absolute ruin. He opened his mouth, a fresh, agonizing sob, tearing at his throat, his hand reaching out toward the glass as if he could somehow claw his way back through time to that consultation room. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't offer a final, cutting remark. He wasn't worth the oxygen it would take to form the words. I held his gaze for one long, heavily silent second, acknowledging his absolute destruction. Then I turned my back to the glass. I pushed through the revolving doors of St. Jude's, stepping out into the biting winter air. The cold hit my lungs like a shock paddle. It smelled of exhaust fumes and impending snow. It smelled sharp and real and alive. I pulled my collar up around my neck, dug my keys out of my pocket, and walked toward my car. I had a dinner reservation at 6, and for the first time in 5 years, I was actually hungry. That's the end of Nora's ruthless, deeply satisfying journey. If you felt every ounce of that icy revenge and loved watching Caleb's world completely crumble, smash that. Like, button share this video with anyone who appreciates a story where the protagonist finally chooses herself over a toxic relationship. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next intense audio drama. Leave a comment down below what was the most satisfying moment of Nora's revenge for you. See you in the next story.